Great blue heron, go hunting at night. Stillness of midnight, the crow possessed by pride. Great blue heron, go hunting at night.
All right, well, we could do like another hour of songs. Um, Welcome everyone. It's so nice to see everyone, and it was so nice to see so many of you on the hike we took last week. Once again, around this time of year, a lot of the places are quieter. Um, of just what the green winged teals, the count was more than 200 that we saw. And then there was all of these different kinds. I took a picture. I think there was a weird duck called a gadwall. So I think we had one of those. It was just a wonderful hike that we took, and a number of people in the room and online were there. So thank you for your company, Barbara. It was great to see you again. Um, and if anyone is interested, I'll be doing a hike Sunday of this week at the Bashak from 10 to 11:30 in the morning. So, just if you want to get out, just such a beautiful area that we live in. Thank you to Dorothy and Cultural Affairs for hosting this. I don't know if you wanted to say anything. And thank you for just, there's all these great birding groups. The Mearns Bird Club had people were out hiking the night we were out. That's a great bird group if you're interested. The Orange County Audubon Society, the hike we had done earlier this week was at their sanctuary near Goshen. The Bashakil area is a managed wildlife area, just an environmental center there. Just so many great resources um, for us in this area. Dorothy, did you have any announcements you wanted to make? Okay. Okay. Dorothy, if you couldn't hear her at home, I said we're going to be doing a lecture series again next semester, and there are more events that Cultural Affair runs. And if you'd like to be on the email blast to get more signups for those, then please let us know. Okay. So today I was hoping to maybe consider birds with everybody else because it's great to see the birds out there, but there are so many other things, and obviously they interact. All right, birds aren't there unless they get to eat stuff. There are things out there that the birds don't want to eat them. So birds are connected with everything else around. There are food chains. I'd like to kind of warm up the topic. Talking about a few other things other than birds, and all of these would take hours and hours. So maybe this is best left off for next semester. But I'd like to actually lift a chair in a second. Life in general revolves around two big things. I could add on a couple others, but let's just make it simple. Two big things. To get through your day, you need energy and you need carbon molecules. All right. So this stuff here, all right, this is protein, which is carbon based. There's carbohydrates, which are carbon based. Or nucleic acids like DNA, carbon based. There's lipids, carbon based. Sure, there's other things needed too. You need a little nitrogen, but let's just kind of stick with those two. All right. To get through the day, you, me, and the birds, all right, we need energy and we need carbon. Where do we get them? All right. Well, first off, the sun. All right, the sun is going to help give us both of those because so many organisms use sunlight, for energy. All right, so here's blue-green algae. We'll start with the simplest one and then we'll start going up the food chains. All right, and I want to just say what I mean by energy. In that, if I pick up this chair, all right, I spend a little energy doing it. Now, I do not have the power to make energy go away. That's something none of us do. We don't create it, we can't destroy it. So it's still there. And if you ask, well, I saw it move a second ago, how is it still there? It's been converted into potential energy. All right. And now, when I feel like it, I can let go of the chair and it could do work for me. It could break something if I put it on the. So the energy didn't go away. It was just stored by nature of position. The position of this chair was holding energy. So what organisms do, starting with bacteria, so blue-green algae are actually not algae in the true sense, they're bacteria. They can take sunlight and they store it in chemical bonds. So the energy from the sunlight, it's still there. It's just waiting for use later. Now, let me be specific on the chemical bonds. That's carbon, which we also need. We're surrounded by carbon. Here's carbon dioxide that's in the air around us. But we need like cool carbon, like sugars and lipids and proteins and DNA molecules, not this carbon dioxide stuff. So how are we going to get this, carbon stuff? Well, we as animals, we have to eat other things. That's our thing. Like we animals, we eat stuff. We take from others. That's the definition. All right. We're not doing photosynthesis. We're not decomposing. We take from others. So we look for others that put, not only chemical energy in molecules like that glucose, but actually put carbon there. They took sun's energy to rearrange the carbon and carbon dioxide to make things like glucose. And so then we animals, we have to seek those out. All right. And that gets us through our day to get the energy and the carbon molecules, which we will build our bodies from. Originally, the sun was involved in both. So these bacteria, once again, the cyanobacteria, they do photosynthesis, and they're in the pond chains, the food chains around us. Now I'm going to start jumping around. We're not going to mention them anymore, but I apologize. I'm a big fan of blue-green algae. So just they're green. They do photosynthesis, and they release oxygen as a waste. You're not impressed, all right, because you're saying, yeah, look at all the other things which are green, do photosynthesis, and release oxygen as a waste. Yeah, because all of them have cyanobacteria descendants living inside them. All right, the chloroplast of the trees and the grass, etc., are these guys. They were the ones who invented the whole photosynthesis thing. And then if you were to look at, say, green algae, they're green because they're chloroplasts of the descendants of bacteria. So we could go into these, but that's not the purpose of today. So in addition to the bacteria doing it, here we have algae doing it. On land, we have plants doing it, but I was just thinking maybe I'll stick with the water food chains for a little bit. Here's more protists doing it. These are bigger than bacteria. These are euglenozoans. And algae come in colors. All right, if we were diving in the ocean, we'd see some red ones. But even here, we got some brownish ones. All right, so diatoms. Here are some diatoms going. I don't know how many of you are impressed by diatoms, but diatom photosynthesis puts as much oxygen in the air as all of the world's rainforests. All right, so diatom's incredibly important for the planet. So algae, they come in colors. There's greens and browns, etc. So in other words, there is stuff here that has energy inside that has ultimately come from the sun, and the energy has been used to turn carbon from the not so useful form of carbon dioxide into organic molecules that then you could use to build a body with. So that's what they've done. Now, when we think about life on Earth, I think a lot of us are thinking of the animals, but just real quick, reality check. What do we mean by life on Earth? Well, if we were to weigh it, let's start weighing animals, or life on Earth. All right, so viruses would weigh that much. So if we put all the viruses on Earth, they would weigh that much. Animals, there's a lot of animals. Look how much the animals would weigh. All right, I'm sorry, went too fast. There's the animals. All right, here's the protists, like some of those green algae and some of the brown algae I mentioned. They outweigh the animals. Great. Here's one kind of bacteria. Here's fungi. Here's the other kind of bacteria. All right, so like the cyanobacteria would be included in that. So a lot of stuff as we start talking about like who's in food chains and what to eat. Of course, I've left out the big one. The big one would be plants. And if I wanted to add plants, look at what I'd have to do. So if we were to weigh life on Earth, all right, most of it is green. There's just an incredible amount, just, you put it on a scale. So if animals need energy and animals need carbon-rich molecules, obviously plants are a place where that can come from. And the Earth, if we talk about life on Earth, plants outweigh everything else combined by far. Now, I'm sorry, I've got another one of those with insects, but we'll get to that in a little bit. If you don't mind, let's stay with the aquatic things for a minute. I want to zip through this and get to the birds. But if there's photosynthetic things in the water, all right, well, then things can eat them. Now, some of these are uh, one-celled organisms, et cetera. So there's some green algae, but there's some one-cells things swimming around. So we got one-celled organisms, which we can see. But then we have animals. Now, when I use the word animal, I'll bet you're thinking of big things. But lots of animals are actually microscopic. As adults, you can't see them without a microscope. So here's one called a rotifer. That's a little animal. Here's a branchiopod, all right, sometimes called water fleas. That's a little animal. I'm zipping through these on purpose. The goal is not to introduce these. There would be another thing. But there's Daphnia. There are these ones that actually look like they have shells. But if you say, oh, that looks like a little clam, and then legs come out, that's something called an ostracode. The world has gazillions of worms that most people will never ever see because most of them are microscopic. So if you were to just go to your pond, pull out some water, you'd see these little worms called nematodes. They're one of the most abundant things on Earth. We'll be talking about insects very soon. Some larvae live in water, like this mosquito larvae. Here's an aquatic little arthropod. It's called a copepod. Here's another one called an amphipod. Here's another one called an isopod. We don't have time. There's a whole bunch of these once we start getting into the insects. But my point is, animals, we're going to need energy and carbon molecules. And there's plenty of that in the water, all right, because you've got the algae, you've got the blue-green algae. You've also got some of these things which are decomposing dead leaves. So even though aquatic ecosystems are aquatic, an awful lot of the food chain actually starts on land. All right, so when leaves fall in the autumn, the dead stuff ends up in the water and then it decomposes and that ends up being, the beginning of food chains. So there are all these little critters and little algae and little plants in the water, and that gets back to the birds. All right. So birds can now use that because birds are animals. They don't do photosynthesis, they don't decompose, so they need energy, they need carbon molecules. So how do they get them? Let's start with water. A lot of them get them in water. Now, we're going to focus on Orange County, but we'll mention other things. And to get them underwater, sometimes you dive, right? And if we look at birds, there's a lot of birds that dive, right? You saw a penguin, you see puffins. Now, very often, and as I go through, I'm just going to have to say what you need to change in order to do that. What are your adaptations to feed in this way? So diving birds often have reduced wings, right? Because when they swim underwater, they're kind of using them as oars. And then also, if you're going to dive, big wings are going to trap a lot of air, so you can't dive very well. So a lot of birds that are diving, like that was a pied-billed grebe, they're not very good at flying. In fact, every now and then you'll get to some which actually will lose their wings or their ability to fly altogether. We'll see this in a little bit. We have this double-crested cormorant in the Galapagos Islands. There's a flightless cormorant. It's really good at diving, but it had to sacrifice flying because if you have big wings, once again, they trap so much air that you're not diving as well. A lot of the ducks will dive and feed underwater. If you go underwater, well, I mean, these are ducks with wide bills. We'll get to other ones in a second. They can go after those aquatic plants. There are plants underwater which are then, trapping energy and carbon molecules, et cetera. And so diving ducks can get those. And if you want to feed on that stuff underwater, there's just certain things that diving birds tend to do. You want to waterproof your feathers. There are exceptions of that. I'll go through in a second. Your feet tend to be larger with webbed toes. And if you want to dive really deep, then you're just going to have to like change your heart and your ability to bind oxygen because you're a diver. It's like without scuba, you have to, make some physiological accommodations. So there are a lot of aquatic plants, and we have a lot of, waterfowl in our area that can feed on them. Once again, just last week, we took a hike and with, well over 200 waterfowl we were seeing. It was 450 before, just at our little, sanctuary up the road. So they are primarily feeding on aquatic plants, hence the duck bill. Some of them have narrower bills, and that's what you would have if you were going after like fish or more aquatic bugs to pierce them. Like you have a broad duckbill and you're like grabbing leaves and taking a big swath of things. And so as some ducks do what we call dabble, where they just kind of upend themselves, they put their butt in the air and they're just getting what they can reach. Those are called the dabbling ducks. And then we have ones which can dive. They dive under water here. So if you're going to feed underwater, you can dive to get that. If you want to be super fancy, you can plunge dive. All right, so what you do is you fly over the water, and all of a sudden you take a nosedive and go after something that's in the water. So this is primarily going after fish, which would have been then eating all the little critters that we talked about. So in our area, kingfishers are very good at that. Notice how long their bill is so that they can streamline their body and then kind of dart like an arrow into the water. Of course, if I kept doing that from a height, I'd hurt my head. So you're going to have to make accommodations. So maybe strengthen your neck muscles, maybe put air bags around some of your organs just to absorb shock. So, you know, as we look at the birds that dive, so here's pelicans diving. Not any bird can do that. You have to kind of change your physiology to do that. There are gannets that can do it, and here in the Galapagos, here are boobies which can do that as well. And so there's, you know, food to be had underwater, and one of the ways of getting it is to dive. Of course, once again, you know, how do birds do that? Then, you know, like I said, there are some adaptations. We'll see one more dive, and we'll go on. So plunge dive, that's another way to do it. But you don't have to dive, all right, because like I said, a narrow bill would help you get some of those little critters, like those water bugs, etc. Insects which go on the surface of the water, or like little crayfish, those little arthropods, etc. And so there are an awful lot of birds which have narrow beaks, which allow them to get those little critters. Once again, the economy is the same. All right, so the sunlight is being trapped by the things that do photosynthesis. The little bugs are eating them, the little fish are eating them. And so now there's all of those little critters, and they've got energy in them, and they've got carbon molecules in them. And these birds say, that's what I need. I'm an animal, so that I'm going to get it from them. So here we can see them getting it. But obviously, this is a tougher lifestyle. They're wading. So you need long legs, all right? You need a long bill, and very often a very sensitive bill, because you're putting it in water. Maybe you can't feel, maybe you're putting it in mud. So you're, you know, and a bill is just, you know, lengthened jaws. So like if you were feeding like that, you would have really, really long jaws that would have a very delicate sense of touch. So if you're just putting stuff around in the mud, you would be able to sense the movements of other things. Now, the greater and lesser yellowlegs are in a bird family. We talked about it, the family Scolopacidae, as are these sandpipers. So here's a spotted sandpiper. Notice they're relatives, but built a little different. Their legs aren't quite as long. Their bills aren't quite as long. Here's the least sandpiper, even smaller. And that helps them all live in the same area. You can go to the sanctuary and see all of them. Greater, lesser yellowlegs, the sandpipers, the least sandpipers. But because they have different builds, they're feeding in different places. This one, notice it's more on the shore in a mud flat. The other ones were wading in the water. They're not directly competing with each other. They're eating the same kinds of things, but in slightly different places. So they can kind of coexist a little bit better that way. Right, so we've got a bunch of, yeah, so here's a bunch of them coming through. Now, these guys don't live here. We only see them during migration. And if you see how many of them there are, that's because some of these are migrating, like not only to South America, but to far South America. And they laid their eggs up in far North Canada. That's a really long trip to go from the north of Canada to the south of South America. And so some of these birds, I mean, they're not just feeding to get them through the day. They're trying to travel 1,800 miles, all right, which is, you know, an impressive feat by any means. So our area is not only critical for the birds which, like, you know, live here in the summer and lay their eggs, but also for Canada's birds and for South America's birds, which are back and forth. There are ones we can count on seeing, and then unusual ones like this dunlin. a little curve in its bill. All right, that was a neat bird to see because they're not as common. But once again, different adaptations. So having a slight curve in your bill can do something. Now, I hate if I ruin anything for anyone, but when you were kids, ever go snipe hunting or like convince a friend to go snipe hunting anyway? No? Oh, okay. So if you're not in on the joke, back in the day at least, it was considered to be like a fictional thing. And so what you were going to, if your friends invited you to go out snipe hunting, they just wanted to get you in the dark and scare you. All right, they were going to like put you in a place where you're like holding a bag with a paper bag with like bread in it, and they're all laughing at you. That was the thing. Years later, I found out there actually are snipes and they live in our area. So here is a Wilson snipe in our area. Notice how long the bill is. All right, once again, very good for feeding in mud. A lot of, these little aquatic animals will burrow into the mud and you can eat them, but, once again, you have to have adaptations like the snipe here does, or its cousin, the American woodcock, does the same for earthworms. So it's feeding on land on things in the mud or the soft ground, but it has to have a long bill. I'm sorry, they're nocturnal, so I don't have like the best adaptations or the best pictures of them. I'm sorry, let's check I think, aren't nematodes parasites? Nematodes, there's lots of different kinds. Some are parasites, some are. That was a question online. But then there are other birds that can do it a little bit differently. So you don't need a really long bill, but now you're going to rely more on vision. All right, so there's lots of different ways to take advantage of the food stuff here. One of the things that these guys do, because they're not feeling with their bill, because they don't have that long sensitive bill, watch their feet. All right, they keep walking and tapping on the ground, and they're trying to scare up some movement in some potential prey that then they'll go after with their beak. So if you watch them, they'll just just kind of continually be tapping. Their feet kind of start and stop, and that's kind of doing the same thing as the long sensitive bills we're doing in the other relatives. So there are plovers like the killdeer or a couple others which migrate through. Okay. Well, just a couple other things here and on. These birds are neat. They can actually adjust the amount of air that they keep under their feathers. So, like, they could float like that if they wanted to, but they could say, oh, I'd like to float a little lower. So they could just sink a little more. They could sink a little more. They could go underwater. So that's a neat little ability. Like if they're hunting, they can decide how deep they would like to go. Well, I'll be honest. As I was trying to cut some of the invasive grasses in the wetland this summer, it's hard. Like I'd wear waders, but going in mud, it's exhausting. It's like your feet don't want to come out now. It's just so much work to pull your feet up. And I have a video that there's a trail cam I put out of Canada geese, and they were having the same experience. Like they were not loving this because every time they put their foot down, they would sink. They'd have to pull it up. And so after a while, it's not worth it. You're spending so much darn energy. But another adaptation that you could have if you want to feed on this is really big feet that spread out your center of gravity. So there's a bunch of big birds that do that, like the common gallinule that we see here. Coots are like that. They don't have webbed feet, but it's close. They have big feet with fleshy pads. It's not webbing, but it's most of the way there. And then there are things elsewhere, like there's a bird in Latin America called the jacana that can like walk on lily pads. All right, because it has these huge feet that just spread out its body's weight so much. So here, like I would be sinking in this mud and it would be horrible, but those really big feet, help it there. So there's food to be had, but in order to get it, you probably need some adaptations. All right. Now, a lot of the birds, which we talked about, they're eating primarily one special thing, but a lot of birds are omnivores. I mean, you need energy. All right. So if there are bugs available, eat the bugs. And if it gets cold and there are less bugs available, then you eat the plants. I mean, because there's energy in both. You need carbon molecules. So once again, be an omnivore, eat both. And so something like a sandhill crane, if you asked what they eat a lot of plant material. All right, so they can eat leaves, they can eat roots, they can eat tubers, but they eat a lot of small animals as well, small vertebrates, et cetera. And so, their long necks allow them to reach a lot of stuff. And I do want to transition to going on land because there's just so much cool stuff about how birds eat. We want to leave the aquatic stuff, but just, I mean, look at the diversity of bills. All right, so each one is kind of specializing for specific types of habitat. So whimbrel, oh, such a long curved bill. Here's an interesting one, the oyster catcher. All right, so oyster catchers can eat, you can see it at the Jersey Shore. I've never seen one this far inland, but they're around here. But what they try to do is if a clam or an oyster or scallop or something is just sitting there with its a shell a little open, it can quick stick its bill in the shell, cut the muscles which would close the shell, and then they get to eat, whatever bivalve that is. And they have to be quick because if the thing closes its shell, it closes it on the bill and then they can starve. All right, because the thing won't let go. But once again, all of these different adaptations for aquatic life. Right. We talked about the herons, right? And obviously their necks come in handy. If you've got this long neck, then you can be far away from the surface of the water. So the fish underneath, they think that your legs are just kind of like the trunk of a plant or something. And all of a sudden this, a neck comes down and stabs them or pierces them, etc. And then they've then modified their throat, and they try to swallow these fish whole. Obviously, birds don't chew. And so this went on for a long time, but here it was a huge catfish that this great blue heron was able to swallow. Once again, adaptations, if you're going to live like that, you have to have modified vertebrae that put a kink in your neck. I mean, notice the little L there. Plus, we mentioned this before, like when I think of a neck, I think that, here, you have your trachea, your esophagus, and there's your vertebral column. But there's actually switch places, like halfway down their neck. The things that I just mentioned, they switch places, and the vertebrae is in the front, and the trachea is now behind, which is just crazy. But that's yeah. I lose more trail cameras. So all of these are adaptations. Now, no bird magically gets those. And so some birds, I think, would rather have some. Cormorants, they don't have quite the waterproofing that other birds do. Like, so there's, birds have a gland that's right on the base of their tail called the preen gland or the preen oil gland. And what you'll see a lot of aquatic birds doing is they turn their necks, they'll get a little of the oil and then they rub it all their feathers and it gives them waterproofing. Lots of birds do it, but aquatic birds more than others. Cormorants, they don't have it all. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll talk about you. They don't have it all that well, so their feathers aren't as waterproof. So you might see them very often like drying out their wings, etc., just because they're not as good at keeping their feathers dry as say ducks would be. Here's that flightless cormorant that I mentioned from the Galapagos. Once again, just maybe wings aren't even helping you. Just lose the wings and you become a better diving bird. Here you can see how small its wings are. Here's a second example of that. Frigate birds, they don't waterproof their feathers, but they feed on fish. So how do you do that? Well, you can try to catch them from above, like just swim over if one's floating on the water. You can go after nests and eggs and things like that. You won't get wet that way. But you know what they do? They have a very interesting lifestyle. They steal from other birds. So they're just hanging out, and they're looking for all these other little birds to catch fish. And then they go after those birds and they steal that. They actually take the fish out of their throats. All right. And so if you're afraid to get wet, you can't dive in looking for fish, but you can steal from other birds which have gotten those. Frigate birds you usually see farther down south, but I actually saw one in this area, and it was right after a hurricane. There's birders which do that, like, oh, there's a hurricane, quick, everyone, we're going to go out birding, because sometimes you'll just get these odd birds you're not used to seeing that the storm, in order to evade the storm, they fly off course, and you can see some weird ones that I got to see. Okay. So, I'm sorry, you're out of order. I don't know. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, you're down in the bug category. We'll get to you. La, 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 la. Okay. Then just, some other things really quick, like green herons. It's not really tools, but they'll throw things in the water kind of like bait, and little fish come up and say like, "Ooh, what the heck is that?" And they eat the fish. So almost like tool use. So that's kind of cool. So there are lots of plants in aquatic environments and algae. All right. And then there's lots of little critters eating the plants and the algae, which you can then use for energy sources. So a lot of birds do that. But there's more to talk about. So let's shift gears. And here you see life on land. There's lots of plants on land. You saw how much the plants of Earth would weigh. And so you could eat those. Problem though, if you're going to eat plants, you'd probably need a lot of intestines, like cow, goats, sheep. I mean, big intestines. And that would inhibit flight. All right. And so if you've ever tried to watch a goose take off, it's hard for them. Like the birds on your deck, are near your feeder. You come out your screen door, they just put their wings down and they're in the air. Whereas the swans and the geese, you see them, they're like trying to run along and doing it slowly, get this good, just they're heavy. All right. If you're going to have the intestines to digest a plant material, it's going to impede your flight. So not as many birds do that. There aren't many birds that eat green things. So when we look at geese and like Canada geese, I know, we've seen so many of them, maybe we aren't impressed. But in that sense, they are impressive. Very few birds can live the way they do and live on like grass and fibrous material. They and the swans are doing this. Once again, how many birds do you see doing this? Not too many. Lots of birds will eat seeds or fruits, but the leaves, it's hard. And once again, there would be adaptations for this. One of the adaptations is you don't keep food in your digestive tract long. Like a cow would say, let's slowly digest this. Geese are like, nope, 2 hours and it's gone. All right, it's going to go through in 2 hours, because otherwise, if you just keep it there, then you'll be too heavy at that moment when you need it to fly. So just just keep eating lots of it. Birds eat stones, all right, and we call them gizzard stones or gastroliths, because what you do when you eat fibrous material is you say, I'm going to take my cheek teeth and crush this. The plant material is going to go between these grinding cheek teeth, and that'll break it down so now my digestive system can access the ripped up plant parts. But birds don't want teeth because they're heavy, but also they would be in the wrong place. If you're a bird, the heaviest stuff you want in your chest, which is your center of gravity. If you had a long neck and heavy stuff at the end, that's now weight away from your center of gravity. That's just going to mess you up. So birds said, I'm going to lose the teeth. But if they need to grind plant material, they say, I'm going to do it here. So they eat stones. And then the stones will just kind of go back and forth in what's called their gizzard and be called gastroliths. So let's see that. I don't know why.
Stones stay in their system, or
No, so
with each meal?
So they don't have to, and I apologize. Some of what I'm about to say, I know a bit more from dinosaurs, because dinosaurs, you could also find as fossils. You could find gastroliths. Oh, look, here's the gut. Here's all of them, and some of them are smooth, like round rocks, meaning that they probably were in there for a while, just grinding and grinding and grinding. They got like round and smooth. But when people find fossils, every now and then they just find a round rock, and they think, I think this is a gastrolith from some dinosaur that got passed, but who it was, no one will ever know. So I don't think they're permanent, but I do think that they stay long enough to be like a rock tumbler almost, and to get lose their sharp edges. That's okay. So a couple of things as we start getting into plants, because I already mentioned the gizzard, I just want to go through. So here's a bird's mouth. There are no teeth there. Here's the esophagus, but birds have an extendable esophagus, all right, forming an area called a crop, all right? So there's a big area that can swell. Why? Because if I'm a bird, like a dove, right, this is a dove, I'm safe, relatively safe up in the trees. But my food, like seeds, I'm going to eat mostly seeds, sometimes bugs, but all that stuff's on the ground. Once I'm on the ground, there's foxes, or I'm vulnerable now. So what I want to do is eat as much as I possibly can, fast as I possibly can. And I can go back to the tree limb and digest there. So they have this area in their esophagus which just can just swell up and just be full of seeds because they're not, the digesting comes later. Just get it in your system now and then get back to the tree. So that's one of the features of an avian digestive system, having a crop. That's part of a stomach. That's another part of the stomach called a gizzard. All right, so a lot of animals can split up the stomach and have different regions. Cows do. Cows have a couple of regions. And birds typically do as well. And they have a muscular region called a gizzard, and that's a place that can grind. All right, and so they're not grinding with their teeth, but rather grinding with a gizzard. And if they swallow stones, then there's hard stuff there. And so here's just an example from the Museum of Natural History. This is a dinosaur called Psittacosaurus, and look at all the little rocks that it ate. All right, and so as it, was then digesting its food, all of that food was as your stomach churns, anything that's in there is being ground up by these little rocks. There are some other things that you can have as well. So, for example, a lot the birds like the ostrich, the rhea, etc. They can also have, if that's the small intestine becoming the large intestine, right where it starts, these like big dead end bags called ceca that just store a lot of microbes and also are something we find in the ones which are eating plants as an adaptation. Okay. Now, gizzards, I apologize. Here's, their gizzard, turkeys, so strong, it generates twice the force that you do with a maximal bite. And like if you were to picture a walnut, like you need a nutcracker. I can't do that, but they can with their gizzard. Their gizzard is so strong they can eat an acorn, they can eat a hickory nut, and walnuts I think are the maximum that they can do. They can crush those. So once again, we would do that with our teeth. And there's something really hard. I'm going to bite down hard on it. Birds would just swallow it whole and then use their gizzards. So turkey gizzards, very good at that. So once again, lots of things to eat in the world. And now that we're on land, we start with the plants. And if you're going to eat plants, there's some adaptations, and we went through some of those, but there's a few more coming. Question in the chat. Okay, I'm sorry, that was an easy one. So if the question is, if both mammals and birds evolved from reptiles, are we evolutionary cousins? Well, so with relatives, like we're all related to each other. All humans are kin. My great-great-grand-somethings are your great-great-grand-somethings. But then among this great human family tree, you're more closely related to some people than others. And then the same thing would be true then of the biological world. Are birds and mammals cousins? Well, if you're considering amphibians, fish, and bugs, the answer is yes. All right, because birds and mammals are what we call amniotes, more closely related to each other than they are to amphibians, fish, or invertebrates. But then after that, the split, when would we have split? Let's go with 320 million years ago was the last time those two branches of the family tree had anybody in common with each other. So we're cousins in that sense, but very distant cousins. Good question, TJ. There's more in plants that you can get. So you can specialize if you're going to feed on plants, what part of the plant. All right, so there's nectar. All right, and you can help pollinate the plants. And very often then we see that there's this coevolution where if the animal is helping to pollinate the flower wants the animal to thrive. All right, the plant is rooting for the animal, and then the animal's rooting for the plant. So they're helping out each other. And so we see this hummingbird at a flower which is designed for it. All right, hummingbirds have long beaks and they see the color red. Unlike bees don't really see the color red. They see like ultraviolet, they see colors that we don't, but they don't really see red, they see it as black. So if you see a red flower with a long tube, that's for either butterflies or hummingbirds. And so the hummingbird the plant is producing all of this food for the hummingbird. And then if you were to go to different areas where they have different types of hummingbirds, look at all the different kinds of beaks, because there's different kinds of flowers. And so the flowers all have a strategy. Like, I want this hummingbird to pollinate me. I want this one. There was one I wasn't able to get to see. There's a weird flower in Ecuador, and then there's a weird hummingbird that actually has a bill that curves up instead of down. I wasn't able to see it, but then that bill is specifically designed to help pollinate that flower, which was rather common. So once again, you can feed on nectar, all right, but you have to have modifications. One of the other modifications is plants aren't very sturdy. So hummingbirds have that metabolism, which allows them to hover in that area. But then again, you could do other things as well, because some plants are a little sturdier. And so here's a plant that you could see down in Florida or in the Caribbean. This is what's called the banana quit. So notice it's also feeding on nectar. All right, the same thing as a hummingbird, but it's not a hummingbird. And instead of hovering next to the flower, it's going to just perch on a thicker flower. Okay. So you can eat nectar. You can eat seeds. Certainly, that's a big part of their diet. I did have this. I'm sorry, I was putting this together. Okay. Just because seeds vary in how thick they are, one of the things we often see in the seed-eating birds is a thick beak. So if you look at this rose-breasted grosbeak, just very, very thick beak, once again, you say, aha, you specialize in seeds. They can eat plenty of other things too, and they can eat bugs. But if they have a thick beak, now there's seeds on the ground that most birds can't eat, but now they can. So that's an advantage for those. So seed eating is a possible. Where'd we go? Sorry, where's our birds? Oh, there we are. Yeah, okay. Going to say, as we go through plants, there's more parts of plants. You can eat fruits. And so there are birds that eat fruits. Toucans do. All right. Now, once again, they don't have to, just because you eat a lot of fruit doesn't mean you have to not eat other things. Like toucans can eat small vertebrates and the like. But here you can see a small toucan eating a lot of fruit. Tanagers are very good at fruit. All right. Anyway. So I'm sorry, I'm zipping through. Just trust me, we got plenty of tanagers eating fruit in this one. Okay, and we have lots of fruits in this area. Now, lots of birds eat fruit, but some birds are really good at it. In that they can eat nothing but fruit, at least for a while. Cedar waxwings would be an example of that. So lots of birds eat fruit. They're really good at it. And we can tell two ways. One, there are fruits that no one else can eat that they can. Cedars, for example, right? Bayberry, poison ivy, other things can eat. But like just these fruits, they have waxes on them. Just other birds won't touch them. They just can't really digest them. But cedar waxwings, their digestive systems can. All right, so all of a sudden there's all these berries around that they can eat that no one else can. So this was on campus by Horton Hall. There's a couple cedar trees. Here you see those, but you see all these cedar waxwings, but you don't see other birds. Other birds can't eat that. All right, it's just too waxy or whatever, but they're special in that sense. One of the other anecdotes I like about those, cowbirds will try to lay their eggs in anybody's nest to get the other birds to care for their young. But if the cowbirds lay their eggs in their nest, the young die, because they're just feeding their young fruits. And cowbirds need at least some bugs to go in there. Baltimore Orioles are like that too. Baltimore Orioles are very good at living on mostly fruit. And to the point that, once again, cowbird young won't do well them. So, lots of birds can eat fruits. There are some that do it better. And then even among the warblers are mostly bug eaters. And so warblers are not in our area much anymore. But even last week on our hike, we very briefly saw a yellow rump warbler, which is this one. And you say, wait, shouldn't you be gone? Don't you eat bugs? And if you look at it, it's eating poison ivy berries. Poison ivy berries aren't easy to manage, but yellow rump warblers, unlike most warblers, can manage. And so they can stay in this area a little longer than other ones could. Same thing with the palm warbler. They can eat more plant material and they can feed on the ground. Most warblers don't. So most warblers have to wait until the leaves come out But that's why this is one of the first warblers you'll see in the spring, because they feed a little bit differently. Right. So kind of like those, sandpipers and the like. You've got all these birds, and even if they're eating similar things, they can have special adaptations, which give them a little bit of a niche and an advantage. So you'll see some in, some parts of the year rather than the other. Okay. Let's leave the plants and let's talk now about bugs. You can eat bugs. All right. Now, why would you want to eat bugs? Well, once again, let's just not consider plants anymore. Let's just consider animals and weigh them. If we were to weigh all of Earth's animals, all right, so this was kind of like all the ducks we were seeing this week. So come on, I'm sorry. So if you were to put all of Earth's birds on a scale, they would weigh that much. All of Earth's mammals on a scale, they would weigh that much. Nematodes, you would weigh, that. All right, if you were to put human livestock, so humans and human livestock outweigh all wild birds and mammals. That's a different conversation probably. There's a lot of jellyfish. There's an awful lot of earthworms. There's a lot of mollusks. All right, that would include like corals and the like. There's lots of fish. All right. But the biggest one is the arthropods. So once again, way down here are humans, mammals, etc. Fish are this bar, and bugs are that far. By bugs, I mean arthropods, mostly insects. There's a lot of them. So they're eating the green plants, but then that means they've got the energy and the carbon molecules in them. So if you can eat the bugs, there's a lot of food there. Look at all that, bug stuff on Earth. So birds know this, and so birds can eat bugs. How do you eat bugs? Well, lots of different ways. All right, so sometimes you're going to specialize at like being on bark. All right, so you're going to have your toes that can grasp hold of the bark. Strengthen tail feathers. This brown creeper, notice, has a little curve in its bill to help it eat bark. All right, lots of warblers, they just kind of hang out on leaves and they feed there. But this type of warbler, the black and white warblers, they like bark as well. All right, so they're, bark is often thick with lots of crevices where bugs hide. And so, if you've got strong feet, if your tail feathers are strengthened, then you can feed on the bugs that you find there. Lots of different kinds of bugs, and you'd probably say, here's a woodpecker, so it's probably going to make holes in trees. It can, but it usually doesn't. This is a northern flicker, and more than any other bird in North America, it eats ants. So if you're asking who eats the most ants in North America, it's a northern flicker, which means unlike most woodpeckers, they spend most of their time feeding on the ground. And that also means, unlike most woodpeckers, they have to migrate. Because most woodpeckers, as I'll mention in a second, can continue to find bugs throughout the winter. But if you feed on ants on the ground, it gets too cold, you've got to go south. All right, so there's all these different ways of feeding on bugs, but then this, there's adaptations along with each. Okay. We've lost most of our bug-eating birds at this time of year. They've gone south. But they're still bugs and they're still active. You just have to know where to find them. So if you've strengthened your skull, that you can slam your skull into wood so hard that you don't get a concussion, and B, that you make a hole. And then once you have a hole, if you've got a tongue that's so long that it not only goes the length of your bill, but then it goes around the back of your head and ends at your eye, so that when you put your tongue out, it goes far into the hole, you can live on bugs even in winter. All right, so our various woodpeckers, they have done well doing that, except
like the pileated woodpecker would be here in January.
There will definitely be pileated in our area. Do birds migrate? There's that thing called partial migration. So very rarely you'd hate to say they will not. It's often somewhere in the middle. So I would say most woodpeckers will remain in our area. Now, I don't absolutely know this, but when I say that, what could happen is our woodpeckers go south and Canada's woodpeckers come here. So that's another possibility. I know of a couple birds with people have actually researched which of the two scenarios is true, but with woodpeckers, I don't know. And somewhere, I apologize, I'll find it somewhere, but there's so many things to get to. There are different kinds of woodpeckers. One is called the sapsucker. And it tends not to go after the bugs, it tends to go for sap. So it makes little holes, the sap comes out of the tree, it gets the sugar water there. But sap isn't flowing in winter, that's a spring thing. All right, and so sapsuckers would be a second woodpecker that can't find their winter in, they can't find their food in the winter. Okay. So that's one way of eating bugs. There are others, you can just go after flying insects. So there are birds called flycatchers, like this great crested flycatcher. They tend to sit like out in the open and watch for bugs flying by. They can be big ones like dragonflies and they'll prey on those. So you can go after flying insects. And then there are other birds that do the same, but then just do it a little different way. So we have swallows. Right, those are swallows mating. All right, but look at them all. There's bugs flying over the water. Look at all the birds here. Each of those may eat 800 insects a day. All right, so if you just think of how many fewer insects, there are in our environment, just because of all of these swallows. So look at all of these swallows here. Once again, living on insects. The insects are feeding largely on plants. All right, so they've got energy and carbon in them. So if you eat the bugs, that's how you will get through your day. Swallows are great at flying and preying on insects. Better still are the chimney swifts. These things almost never stop flying except to sleep or to sit on a nest. If they're not asleep or sitting on a nest, they are flying. They don't perch, these chimney swifts. So I've read that chimney swift can eat 12,000 insects in a day. All right, because they have, like, if you're going to fly all day, you have to power that. So they just fly around just eating bugs and eating bugs and eating bugs. They've got relatives called the nighthawks that like to come out at dusk and at dawn. But once again, just flying around there, catching catching insects in flight. All right. So you can feed on bugs, and then you can eat mammals as well. So now this is going to start to get tricky because I want to start talking about all the things that birds can eat, but obviously at some point things eat birds too. And a lot of the next birds, they are in both categories. All right, so they eat cool things like rodents, but like owls, all right, rodents are mainly what they're going after, but they eat birds too. All right, so as far as where birds are in food chains, so here's birds that eat mammals, so that's worth talking about. But then we've been talking about birds. There are things that eat other birds, and that would include, birds of prey. We'll see them this winter while most birds have gone south because there are rodents. The rodents are warm-blooded and they're still active. All right, so a lot of the food, like if you eat snakes or frogs or whatever, they're gone until spring. But the rodents are active. So you just fly over a marsh, there's voles and there's little things. So the harrier hawks are going to do that during the day, and the short-eared owls are going to do that at night. Just fly and just go after rodents. Lots of adaptations. For that, owls especially have silent flight. They have such great vision and hearing. Birds also see in UV. So I've read that they can pick out, so at a crime scene, people go in with UV lights and they start seeing all this, like stuff that you wouldn't see without lights. Well, birds can do that, so they can see urine. So like these mice are being super secretive and they're like, I'll just go on this little trail. The birds are flying and they know where the mice, tend to travel. And so lots of adaptations if you're going to prey on mice. So the short-eared owls, they're looking for the rodents even in the winter at night. But then during the day, the same thing are happening with the harrier hawks. Liberty Loop is a great place to see them. But the sanctuary up here in Goshen, here's a harrier hawk flying over there as well. Okay. Now, mainly eating rodents, but there's no rules. All right, in that, if they saw baby birds or the bird's nest, like birds of prey, they're looking to prey on animals. Even if there's one group that they mainly prey on, they'll prey on others as well. Bald eagles are like that. Bald eagles, they eat fish. They certainly do. That's what makes up most of their diet. All right, so we could talk about fish and the kinds of fish, but they go after, if a bald eagle's hungry, it's not going to turn down food. So they'll eat ducks, and I've seen, the diving ducks. That's one reason to dive, all right, is because bald eagles will try to come and eat you. And so you go underwater, and I saw one, like a bubblehead would go underwater, and then the bald eagle was just kind of circling, would pop up, and the eagle would go after it, would go underwater again. And coots, apparently bald eagles like eating coots. I don't think coots can fly quite as well. And although it's rare, even things like adult great blue herons they could go after. I mean, these are big birds of prey that can have a 7-foot wingspan. You know, if they're hungry, you know, they'll go after things. But then they can eat small mammals as well, including small cats and dogs. I had heard there was a kindergarten that had an eagle cam, and like they would start each day by like checking on the eagle cam. And then there was a day that the eagle brought a house cat to the chicks that then like ate it alive. And that was the last day. I think there was like counseling for the kindergarten students and all. So eagles can eat a lot of things, I guess is the moral. Um, if you like hang out at the sanctuary there's just huge big turtles. Okay, let me just, yes, Dorothy, what was your?
Also, yeah,
So yes, they can eat carrion, especially when they're immature. So immature eagles aren't the best at fishing yet. And so while any bird, any eagle can eat carrion, immatures are more likely to. I have read that one of the things that cause eagle populations to decline, both golden and bald, is because out west in winter, they really relied on dead buffalo. That was like a big thing in winter. And then obviously when the buffalo herds disappeared, then, you know, that was less food for them. But yes, they can eat carrion as well. Yes,
saw a bald eagle eating a dead fawn once.
really. So if you were to go to a sanctuary, you just see these huge turtles, all right? And very often, like unless you see a deer, you know, snapping turtles, they're might be the heaviest animal that you see. All right, so they're pretty big. And when they're underwater moving slow, you know, we just saw a whole bunch of birds. There's ducks, there's baby ducks, you know, there's all of these, you know, sandpipers, etc. And so snapping turtles can get them. One of the years, I think it was last year, the sandhill cranes had a chick, and then all of a sudden no one saw it. And they asked like what happened to it. And the running hypothesis is that a snapping turtle might have, you know, grabbed it by the leg and eaten it. So snapping turtles are things that can prey on birds. When it comes to preying on birds, obviously birds have a lifespan starting with eggs and nestlings. All right. And then that's a time when they're very vulnerable. All right. So here you can see, you know, chicks in a nest. Lots of things eat eggs. Lots of things can go after nestling birds, which is why red-winged blackbirds and so many other birds will pester other birds. Like if an eagle or a heron comes in the area, that they'll try to pester them because otherwise things can just kind of fly over and say, where are the nests, you know, and then prey on them. So they just try to keep them out of the area entirely. Now I'll get into at the end some mammals which feed on nests, but lots of birds do too. I mean, ravens are kind of omnivores, as are crows and blue jays. But eggs and nests are very commonly preyed on by blue jays, by crows and ravens. And so, you know, birds face different predators at different stages of their lives. Carolina wrens, they don't really prey on birds, but they really want a place where they can lay their eggs, and cavities are hard to find. So if there's another bird's nest in a cavity, like a nest box, little wrens can go in and just like, you know, break the eggs or kill the young and then lay their eggs there. So once again, as far as what can cause birds, I'm sorry, I knew I put it in here. So um, here are just images of red-tailed, red-winged blackbirds going after a red-shouldered hawk, just pestering it and pestering it to get it to leave the area. Once again, they're protecting their nests, which were in the area, and actually the nest that I had filmed a second ago. Out of all of the predators, there are a lot of raptors, which will sometimes eat birds, but then there are raptors where that's usually what they do. All right. So this is a blue jay-sized hawk called a sharp-shinned hawk. Their main prey is birds. All right. And so when birds are flying, you would think that not too many things can get them. unless you're talking about other birds. So there are some predatory birds which can now fly and capture other other flying birds. Okay, peregrine falcons can feed on a lot of things, but once again, they can go over 260 miles an hour in a stoop. All right, as such, that would be the fastest things alive. They can prey on other birds. So if you've got a whole bunch of ducks flying over a wetland, there's a peregrine falcon over top of that. They can come down, and I've been told that it's just kind of an explosion of feathers when a bird traveling that fast hits a hawk. A funny story, I think it's funny anyway. I knew this one couple that I'm from Philly. They went to like a Phillies baseball game. Like the husband really liked the Phillies, was cheering them on. The wife really wasn't into it. But she brought her binoculars, and there was a peregrine falcon hunting the pigeons in the stadium. So like she had a great time, but she's, her binoculars are on the peregrine hunting the pigeons throughout the entire time. So birds of prey can eat some of them can eat birds occasionally, but some like Cooper's hawk, sharp-shinned hawks, the goshawk, its name is derived from goosehawk. All right, so we have goshawks in our area. Once again, they eat birds like their cousins, the sharp-shins here. I apologize if this traumatizes anyone. So here's a black rat snake on the ground. They don't have to stay there. So they can climb straight up a tree. So when you're walking in the woods, there are snakes above you sometimes. And as such, then birds are not off limits. They can reach birds, they can get nests and eggs, even high up in trees. Right. So, just as birds have specialized to feed on different things. So, here's it just kept going higher and higher in the tree. And then just a couple of mammals, and I'll start to sum up. A lot of mammals are omnivores. It's hard to get through a day. I mean, like I'm a mammal. We're mammals. We're 100 degrees every second of every day, even in winter. That's expensive. We've got big brains. That's expensive. We tend not to drag our bellies on the ground the way the lizards do. And a lot of us are upright walkers, or we're active like deer when they run. That's expensive. We need a lot of calories. So a lot of us will take it where we get it. So even if birds aren't the primary, food source, if you see a bird that you can eat, if you're a mammal, you eat it. If you find a nest that has nestlings in it or eggs in it, you eat them. So opossums do that. Let's just kind of keep on going. Raccoons do that, and they can climb trees and they can come out at night. All right. We've got two kinds of foxes in our area, red foxes and gray foxes. They very commonly prey on birds, including some of the bigger ones like turkeys, one of the big things that they would face. Gray foxes are a little unusual for the dogs. They also climb trees. All right. And so obviously they can prey on birds there. We have coyotes in our area that can travel in groups and hunt at night. So once again, if you're an aquatic bird near water, you've settled down for the evening, you're a duck, you're a goose, etc. There are coyotes. What I'm about to say, I don't know this for a fact, but our swans at the sanctuary, there were 6 cygnets that began the year, 1 finished. All right, so probably carnivores got the other, and swans are big birds. So, foxes and coyotes would be likely candidates for who could prey on them. Then you've got other things. Skunks, will eat eggs and nests. If you're near water, all right, otters are good predators. They'll eat nests and eggs and young birds. Mink will as well. Mink are kind of like small otters, not quite as adept at swimming. This was an interesting one. We have fishers back in the area. So if you look in the weasel family in our area, we have weasels, we have otters, we have minks. We used to have fishers. We don't anymore. This is at the Liberty Loop. All right. But they were gone since I think like the 1920s. Fishers were gone. But they came back. All right. We have fishers in our area again, and at 6.5 Station, I got them on trail camera. So it looks like a mink, it's just a lot bigger and it got like a fluffy raccoon tail almost. But also good at eating birds. We have bobcats. This spring, there was a bobcat in Goshen we caught on a trail cam. The Basha killed the year before. Right, so yeah, we have bobcats in our area. Cats climb trees, domestic cats climb trees. And also then there's one you wouldn't, think of. Rodents eat eggs. Chipmunks are big predators of nests and eggs. Squirrels can, but red squirrels are especially good at preying on birds' nests, etc. So in this world, I think kind of like one more video to sum this up. So in this video, in this world, everyone's trying to make a living. And it's kind of the same. You need energy and you need carbon. All right, that's what you need. And if you look at how do birds get those two things, well, I mean, all of this is going to start ultimately in the sun. And then plants do photosynthesis to trap these things in life. But then you can eat the plants and you can eat different kinds of parts of the plants. Or you could have like aquatic little invertebrates eat the algae. And by plants, I also included the algae. You could have like a little aquatic critters eat the algae. Or you could have bugs eat the plants on land, and then you can eat the bugs. And there's different ways that you can prey on bugs and aquatic things. Or you could let the fish eat the aquatic bugs, and then you could eat the fish, all right, as so many of them do. You could let the rodents eat the plants, and then you could eat the rodents. Or birds are somewhere on this list, you could then eat the birds. Now you could eat the birds as adults, and some things do, especially some birds of prey. Or you could prey on the nest, the eggs, and the nestlings. Or you could just wait till those things die. All right, and then you could be a scavenger that just goes after the carcasses of any of the things that we've just mentioned, and then the cycle starts again. So while this focus has been on birds, in this series, birds are connected with everything else out in there. Like we don't live unless we're getting carbon and our energy from somewhere else. But then the world is full of things that look at us and say, look at that pile of carbon and energy. I'd love to get my greedy little talons or whatever on that thing. So, this has just been kind of a survey of all of the connections that birds have in their food chains and the various adaptations they have to be good at feeding on, whatever, their special prey is. So I'd like to thank you all for coming. Did anybody have any questions? Feel free to shout it out. But once again, thank you once again. Good.
Nice day, sir. Evening.
Thank you. Thank you, you too. Do they pick up? Condors, I don't know. But golden eagles, like you have these mountain goats, golden eagles, they don't tangle with a mountain goat, but like they're pretty big. What they do is they'll get some velocity, and then as they fly by a mountain goat, they'll just like grab it and like throw it off balance, and then it falls to its death, and then they just go down and prey on it there. So yeah, I mean, eagles are big birds. You start getting like 7-foot wingspans, and so you wouldn't normally think that I could eat a mountain goat or prey on a, I'll say person in a second. Well, one of the, especially any of us, New Guinea was colonized by people relatively recently. Nobody was in New Guinea until I think it was like the year like 1300 or something, which for a huge microcontinent, that's late. And when humans, the Micronesians, first got there, they found moas, which were birds, which were 12 to 16 feet tall, right? So huge birds. But then there was an eagle which was preying on the moas. It was huge. I think it was called Haas eagle. And you have to know that, like, the little kids of the tribe, like those eagles, I'm sure would have been a threat to the people as well. Like if you could prey on the 16-foot moa, that the people, they weren't entirely safe either. So thank you so very much for coming. The next couple of weeks, I'd like to kind of like just focus on fall and winter. Like what birds would we see? What are they doing in fall and winter? And then the week after that, spring and summer. And then we'll have our last one on the environmental issues which face birds. Thank you so very much for coming. Yeah.
Also include, you know, us backyard burgers, what's the best thing to feed them?
Ooh, you know what? So here's a great question, and I'm gonna,